and identity. Imagine a group of scholars in Germany determined to rethink society in the face of capitalism, fascism, and the crises of the 20th century. This group became known as the Frankfurt School, formed around the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt in 1923. A few years later, in 1930, Max Horkheimer became its director and transformed it into a hub of radical interdisciplinary thought. Under him, key figures like Theodor Adorno, Erich Fromm, Herbert Marcuse, Friedrich Pollock, Leo Löwenthal, and the close associate Walter Benjamin all contributed to what would later be called critical theory. And don't miss this fact, it was asked in exam. The school was founded in 1925 in Germany, forced into exile during the Nazi era, and is associated with thinkers like Adorno, Horkheimer, Benjamin, and Löwenthal. Pause here and note this down. Critical theory was the school's central contribution. Unlike classical Marxism, which focused narrowly on economics, they brought together Marx, Hegel, Freud, Weber, and others to study modern problems, consumer culture, authoritarianism, and even mass psychology. They were critical of capitalism, but also skeptical of rigid Marxism-Leninism, seeing both as inadequate. Instead, they sought new ways to understand how power worked in everyday life, especially through culture. And this leads to their most famous idea, the culture industry. This term, coined by Adorno and Horkheimer in their book Dialectic of Enlightenment, published in 1947, was asked in exam. They argued that popular culture, whether films, radio, music, or magazines, was not liberating at all. Instead, it dulled critical thinking, promoted conformity, and reproduced capitalist ideology. Culture became standardized, commercialized, and used as a tool of mass manipulation. Even politics was drawn into this machinery, blurring the line between ideology and entertainment. Can you recall the wider impact? Thinkers like Marcuse, in One-Dimensional Man, analyzed how advanced industrial society suppressed radical thought. Adorno developed negative dialectics as a way of resisting closed systems of knowledge. And though Walter Benjamin was never an official member, his essays on art, technology, and modernity profoundly shaped the school's outlook. Later, Jürgen Habermas added his theory of communicative action, showing how dialogue and rational communication could resist domination. Pause again, this is another. Asked in exam, the Frankfurt School's core members included Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Friedrich Pollock, Erich Fromm, Otto Kirchheimer, Herbert Marcuse, Leo Löwenthal, Franz Neumann, and Henrik Grossmann. Associates like Siegfried Kracauer, Alfred Sohn-Rethel, Walter Benjamin, and Ernst Bloch also enriched the group's intellectual atmosphere. When the Nazis rose to power, the school was exiled, first to Geneva, then to New York, and only after World War II did it return to Germany. But exile didn't silence them. If anything, it globalized their influence. So, what's the big takeaway? The Frankfurt School insisted that culture is not neutral. It's a battleground, a site where power, ideology, and resistance are constantly negotiated. Their legacy in critical theory still shapes how we study media, politics, and culture today. Think about this for a moment. How can culture, something we associate with freedom and creativity, become a tool of domination? This is the powerful question Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer asked as leading members of the Frankfurt School in the 20th century. Adorno, trained in philosophy, sociology, psychology, and even musicology, studied at Goethe University in Frankfurt. He fled to England in 1934 to escape Nazi persecution, but returned after the war in 1949 with Horkheimer to rebuild the Institute for Social Research. Horkheimer, born in 1895, had already directed the institute since 1930 and shaped it into one of the great centers of modern critical theory. Both were united in their mission to examine how rationality, culture, and domination are linked in modern society. Pause here and note this Dialectic of Enlightenment, published in 1947, is their most famous joint work. In it, They argued that Enlightenment rationality, which was supposed to free humanity, had instead become an instrument of domination. Rationalization and progress had opened the door to fascism, totalitarianism, and the suppression of individuality. For Adorno, hope lay not in pure reason, but in art, especially modernist art that could preserve autonomy and creativity. Horkheimer, in Eclipse of Reason, also lamented the decline of reason into mere instrumental rationality used to control, not liberate. Now here's the key concept that has been asked in exam, the culture industry. In their essay, The Culture Industry, Enlightenment as Mass Deception, they described mass media films, radio, magazines as a factory of standardized cultural commodities. Instead of encouraging independent thought, it produced conformity. Popular culture was engineered to manipulate people, creating false needs satisfied only through consumption, reducing audiences to passive consumers. Adorno, being a musicologist, even praised avant-garde composers like Schoenberg, whose atonal music resisted commodification, asked in exam. For him, such difficult art kept alive the possibility of genuine autonomy in the face of cultural standardization. Can you recall what they argued about popular versus dominant culture? This too has been asked in exam. Popular culture, they said, reflects shared practices and meanings, but it is also controlled by material and institutional structures. Dominant culture is not just invisible ideology. It is institutional, economic, and political power shaping what people consume. Their critique was sharp. They compared fascist Germany with the American film industry. Both, they argued, were monopoly systems where culture was mass-produced, consumed passively, and used to secure obedience. High art was diminished by commercialization and low art reduced to shallow entertainment. The masses were integrated from above, not empowered to think critically. So Adorno and Horkheimer's warning was clear. Culture itself had become a site of domination under monopoly capitalism and authoritarian states. Yet within art, critique, and critical theory still lay a fragile hope for resistance. And for UGC NET, remember these anchors: dialectic of enlightenment, culture industry, asked in exam; Schoenberg's atonality, asked in exam; and the distinction between popular culture and dominant culture, asked in exam.